Kia ora, welcome. This is a video series designed to support and inspire those of you who find themselves at home and wanting to work alongside mum and dad to build their own things. Stuff. Well, today's idea and contribution is from Rosemary Brown. She said, how about a bird box? I can't think of anything more glorious than providing an opportunity for birds to visit our gardens. And so we're going to crack into one today. Kia ora, welcome. Welcome to the workshop. I've had the privilege of working alongside children in schools and kindergartens to build all manner of crazy bird boxes. It may not be possible for us to get so carried away, but I would like you at least to think, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be that boring. But we do face the fact that there may be limited tools, materials and equipment. So to keep things simple, I would urge you to go to the RSPB site and download their PDF, which has a lovely plan for a very simple project. So to the tools. I'm assuming that you've got some kind of saw, some means of measuring, whether it's a tape, a steel rule, ideally a pencil. You'll have some drill, whether it's electrical, battery. Like I said before, my superstars, they will have at their disposal a tri-square. Megastars will have the clamp. Today I've decided not to forget the thing that we do come across regularly, the bradawl, and a hammer, whatever type. This time we're probably going to need some kind of hinge. Now this is not something that's readily available. So if you don't, we'll make our own. What I'm hoping is that somewhere somebody's got an old ice cream tub from which we can cut some small rectangular plastic strip. It would be helpful if you've got some screws or some nails. Now that's a tall order, we've just got to find what we've got, and I'm hoping that there's something decent around. So let's look at the wood. This can be made from plywood. Ideally we'd be looking at some treated material. Treated is going to last in the outdoor environment that little bit longer. It may be that if you've been recently renovating or building the house, of course, that you might have something like some strips of weatherboard. Weatherboard can be helpful. They're often treated and they certainly will last a long time outdoors. The challenge, if you wish, and the issue is that when you take a section through them and have a look at them, what you'll see is that they're a bit of a funny shape. Now for the more advanced users, this may not necessarily present an issue, but for the beginners it might be problematic. So it's not ideal. Go for it if you're brave enough. What I would suggest would be something as simple as a fence paling. If you've got a simple piece of wood that is like a 6-inch, 150mm wide, you've got the ready makings of that drawing from the RSPB. However, if you don't happen to have one and all you've got is perhaps a small scrap of plywood, then what you're looking for is something over 1 metre. And we'll start off by showing what you've got to do to prepare the board. Basically, we've got to produce a nice thin strip. So if you look at the drawing that you've downloaded from the RSPB, what we're looking for is 150mm. So I'm diligently marking out with my steel ruler 150mm. I'm doing it in a number of places because what I'm going to do then is draw myself a nice long straight line. Of course, if you've got one nice long rule, then you can do it in one go. If not, that's why I did a number of dots. We're going to have to draw the best straight line using the short ruler. I am lucky enough to have a nice long steel rule. You can even see though that it's still not quite long enough. That's where, if you're lucky, you might have something else. Essentially, you're looking for a long straight piece of metal. This is my longest one. This happens to be an old, this is an old favourite, my level. So what we're looking for is to reduce this wide board into some long, thin, narrow strip by basically sawing down that straight line. And what we're going to try and do is saw, but of course, as I said before, the worry is and the danger is that things move around and we end up cutting ourselves. So what I'm going to ask you to do is either get somebody else to hold it nice and still whilst you saw, or if you're big enough, strong enough, you might be able to hold it firmly against the side of a bench or a table or some workplace. If you're not, then of course, find some means. You know, this here I'm going to demonstrate using some clamps. The clamp here will hold it securely to the edge of the bench, and then I can remain safe. Here I'm going to use the panel saw. Here I'm going to use the edge of my thumb well away from the sharp edge. I'm just going to pull back gently 3 strokes. 1, 2, 3. Take my hand away so I'm nice and safe, and then I can proceed to saw. Again, if you're not confident with that, get yourself a block of wood, put it up as close to the wood that you can, and then you can pull back 1, 2, 3. Then you can get your hand away and then carry on sawing. Concentrate on keeping a nice straight line. See if you can concentrate on finding the rhythm. Sing a song in your head of some description. Remember to put the saw away safely. We don't want anybody getting hurt. Okay, so that was if you're using a piece of plywood. Now we're going to get back to using the fence paling, which I think is a whole lot easier because it's already a nice thin narrow strip. Our challenge then is simply to measure and mark out the individual bits that we need. Using either a steel rule or a tape measure, just mark out each piece. Now, just a quick note on the tape measure. Children love to play with these things, you know, let them slide back. It's a disaster way of cutting yourself, so don't do it, please. When you're marking out, take that care. We don't want a wonky donkey. Use the tri-square as a means of really ensuring a nice, perpendicular, right-angled, lovely straight line. But of course, you can do it with a steel ruler, just take care. I suggest you don't mark them all out, mark one piece at a time. Then you don't end up with odd lengths. So we're going to get back to sawing this piece, and again we have to worry about these things moving around. If you're using the panel saw, we're going to carefully clamp it down or get mum and dad to hold whatever you're using in the situation that you're at. I'm in the workshop, I've got the tools and technology. I can use either a vise or, as I'm showing here, using the clamps. Just try and be careful as to where you're putting them. You don't want to bang into these things. A clamp can be used either way, so just think about that a little bit maybe. But when we get sawing, I'm going to use the side of my thumb because I'm used to that now. I'm not scared of it. What you're looking to do is create that rhythm. Just find the rhythm. And just before you break through again at the end, just be soft and gentle because you don't want to snap the wood, you want to cut the wood. So just the last few strokes, take care. So here we have all our pieces already beautifully cut out. Take some time to sand the parts if needs be. The birds are not going to worry about it too much. But you've got some sides. We've got the front piece into which we're going to, in a minute, cut our hole. Have a base. You might want to drill some holes in it to let any water that collects from rain to drain through. And of course we'll need a lid. We'll come back to that in a little later. So now we move on to drilling and marking out the hole position for the entrance. There is a school of thought that says it needs to be slightly perhaps above the base so that young birds can grow and mature in safety and they don't exit the hole until they're perhaps capable of jumping up and even flying up and out. I'm going to make sure that mine is in the centre, so I've measured and marked accordingly. I'll use my bradawl to create a small little dent. And then it's a matter of looking for the right size drill. Now, this is quite important, depending on what kind of bird that you want to attract. So if you go to backyardbirds.co.nz, they'll give you a whole range. I'll put the link up there for people to look at. Now, I don't know what you've got lying around the workshop. This is a spade bit, relatively simple means of cutting a nice wide hole, probably a 32 or a 35 if you're looking for sparrows. These are Forstner bits. Who knows whether you'll have, or Mum or Dad will have some of those. If one of the family is a plumber, maybe they've got one of these, a tank cutter. A very useful device for cutting holes. I use these for making wheels quite commonly. Of course, if you haven't, then you might just be having to draw round things. I mean, you might find there's, the reel of a fishing reel, some, I don't know, tubs of your peanut butter, perhaps a small disc of some sort that you can draw around. That's going to give you the mark. Those graphical people amongst us, you might have a compass. So decide what size that you want to create and what kind of bird you want to attract, and then simply draw on the wood the size hole that you want. For those woodworky smarty pants amongst us, you might really be lucky and have a woodworking compass, and this allows you to, once you've set it up at the right diameter, is to scribe a bit of a line. It's reasonably sharp, and it'll cut a bit of a groove onto the wood. Not that you can easily see it, so what I like to do is add a pencil line around to just give me a hint of, all right, that's where I need to be cutting. Now that's we're going to pretend and assume that you haven't got a drill. So this next sequence is for those who don't have any of those fancy large drill bits, but might have at least one simple twist drill within the toolkit. We can use that to make our bird entrance. Now, if your workbench is precious like the kitchen table, then you might want to protect it with a piece of scrap wood. Please, the idea of upsetting Mum and Dad with wood doing it on the kitchen table is just scaring me. So try and find some means of protecting precious surfaces. Now, I'm going to make a real assumption here that you've got at least one simple drill. So I'm going to use the bradawl, and I'm going to drill out a number of holes in order to get rid of as much material as possible. Now, if we've got a drill and you've got a small drill perhaps, you can then go ahead and drill carefully a series of holes within the space that you want to take out this bigger hole. So we'll just bang this through, boom, 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 job done. And then the issue is, right, well, so how do I get rid of that which is left? Well, if you are lucky, Mum and Dad have got a chisel lying around, ideally a gouge, a round shaped one, you can perhaps take time to cut very carefully the piece that needs to go. Now remember, birds are not going to be too upset if it's not perfectly circular. But see what you can do about removing the material. Now, it may be that you don't have a chisel, so what do you do then? Okay, so what we'll do is consider another means and another tool. I'm just, for the sake of ease, I'm going to place this thing into my vise here so that I can hold it steadily, and then show you another tool. This is a beauty. This is called a coping saw. Now, the coping saw is great because it, unlike the other saws we've been using so far, it allows you to cut in all sorts of different directions. So you've got to take it apart first, particularly in this situation. Reconnect it, making sure that the blade is the correct way around, and that is the teeth pointing towards you. And then what you can do, the beauty of the coping saw is that you can just pull it backwards and forwards in a nice steady fashion and begin to cut. Now, we're going in a circle, so at some point that top of the bar is going to bang into the bench or bang into the side. The beauty of the coping saw is that you can twist it, turn it, move it around a little bit so that you can carry on. And you just keep moving, turning, twisting, cutting until you've managed to cut a full circle. So off we go. That's done, and you can then pop out that centre piece. Remove the coping saw and we're away. Now, it's a bit rough. It's probably not going to upset the birds, but so either use your chisel and take out those last bits that are not looking very nice and neat and tidy. Alternatively, of course, we could use a rasp and a file. So the rasp has got really big teeth, great for taking away lots of wood really quickly. Not very good at making it nice and smooth, but you can hold the front end, push down and twist and turn. You can see that motion. I'm pushing down and twisting. So we managed to do the whole area and create hopefully a little bit more of a circle. What you will find when you finished it is that it looks okay, but it's still a bit rough. That's where the file comes in. It's really intended for cutting metal. The metal has got really small teeth, and it will probably clog up in wood, but the beauty of it is it should produce a relatively smooth edge. You could, of course, if you really wanted to, treat the birds and finish it off with a bit of sandpaper. But here we are, we're ready to start assembling. But you might be saying to me, you know what? I haven't got a drill. I haven't got all these tools you keep showing. So here's another way. What we could do is we can make an entrance for the bird simply by using, I'm assuming we've got a saw. We can create a little V shape. Why not? Now, V shapes are a little bit more difficult to cut on an angle. So if you're using what I've got, which is a vise or a work made of some description, turn it up so you're just sawing down in a nice, simple, straightforward kind of way. Make sure it's all stable. When we're sawing, we don't want things moving. But you can see quite readily that if we cut out this simple V shape, we've got a very simple means for the bird to get in. And no drills, no rasps, no no chisels, none of those other tools that perhaps you do or don't have. So there's one technique. Here's another. What you might consider doing is create like a gap. Right, so now on to bringing this thing together. We've got all our pieces. You'll note that the backboard is slightly longer, and that's because we're going to drill holes top and bottom in order to fix it either to a wall or perhaps to a tree. The base has got to go in, the sides have got to come up, of course, our entrance has got to be fixed on, and we've got to make sure things are truly square. But before we do that, we've got to think about, so how are we going to join it? How are we joining these bits of wood? No, sellotape is not the answer. What we're going to use is one of two things. We're either going to use some nails, and here we've got some relatively small nails. Now, of course, they're not coming through the wood, so they're no good. You could use a great big, no, don't be using a big old nail. What we're looking for is something that's just going to go through the thickness of the material we've got into an appropriate distance. So if this fence paling is about 25mm thick, then you might be using a 50mm nail. But again, we've got to use what we've got around the garage or the workshop. Screws, of course. Here we've got the same opportunity, little diddy ones. They're not going to come through, they're not going to do anything at all. Huge great nut screws, no, we don't need those. We don't need coach bolts or anything like that. We're just looking for a screw about twice the length of the thickness of the wood. But you've got to go with what you've found. At the end of the day, a screwed joint will always be stronger than a nailed joint. So the issue now is bringing this lot together. What we want to do is make sure that whether we're using a screw or nail, that it ends up in the middle of the piece of wood. We don't want it bursting into the centre or the outside. At the end of the day, You know, we don't want a nail sticking into the birds. We don't want to be holding on to nails ourselves. So how do we do that? Well, it's relatively straightforward. We take ourselves a pencil and we mark a line. And what we essentially want is the nail or the screw to come through in the middle of that. So draw yourself a second line, sort of somewhere in the middle, and take your bradawl and mark where you're going to drill your holes. I'm going to drill 3 on this length, so I'm going to mark 3 points with my bradawl. And depending on what you're using, if you're using a nail, you might need a certain diameter. I'm going to use 8 gauge screws, so I'm probably going to use a 4.5mm diameter drill. Now, don't take things to risk. Clamp them down so that when you're drilling, things don't move. We need to look after our fingers. And of course, if you're working on the kitchen table, please don't tell me you're working on the kitchen table, but if you are, you've got to protect that. So put a bit of scrap underneath first, and then clamp it down. We don't want things moving. Okay, so then how to hold the drill. What we want is it nice and square and perpendicular, so we're drilling straight the way down. We don't want to be drilling at an angle. We don't want any wonky donkeys. Okay, so none of that business. Straight the way down. Relatively straightforward, but take some care over that. Okay, so now it should be something that we can run. Given that we've got these holes, when you put these screws in there, it will help carry them into the middle. So the problem then is whether we manage to make them aligned. So how do we do that? Well, easiest, simplest way, put it on a flat bench and then drag it to the edge, and you can at least guarantee that one side is going to be flush with the back. You can then put the screws in there. Easy. Okay, so if you haven't got that opportunity, what are we going to do? Well, if you're lucky enough to have a vise like I have here, you can put it loosely in there, just line it up with a flush with the table, and then when you place it on top here, everything's going to line up. It's then a straightforward situation of putting some glues and screwing. So just drop in a nice line of PVA glue. An exterior grade one would be better if you've got it. Of course, if you haven't, don't be using paper glue, is all I'm saying. Better just to rely on the strength of the screws or the nails. So engage, align and end pressure. That's the mantra I teach all my children. So you engage the screw, you align it into the hole, and you push gently on the end and keep screwing until you manage to get that screw in. Now, as you can see, it's rather laborious. So you could, if you've got a drill driver, if you can turn it to the low speed and engage the clutch mechanism, you can rely upon this to make things a whole lot quicker. Push down, screw down, job done. For those of you lucky enough to have got mums or dads who've got an impact driver, you're sorted, you're in the money. This makes things so much quicker. It's very noisy, scary, and it's wonderful. You just, job done. So what do you do if you haven't got a vise? Well, if you're working on this lovely tabletop bench, whatever it is that you're using, is there a chance that you can clamp somehow to the side of it, like I'm doing here? I'm using the side of my bench and I've just put a clamp there, and now I make sure it's level and flush to the top of my bench, so that when I come up with my, that is when it's still, when I come up with a piece of wood, there we are, it's just easy peasy to put the screw in using whatever mechanism. I'm going to go back to my impact driver. But what if you haven't got that? Supposing, perhaps there's some intricate way in which your bench is just designed in a certain way, you can't do that. Well, if you've got your clamps, why not just clamp them? That'll stop things wobbling. That's all we're trying to do. Just find a means of holding one piece to the other. Then perhaps you can clamp it to the table and then you can put your screws in. Off you go. Bish bash bosh. Job done. Now to put the base on. Well, we can use the tri-square to make things nice and square, or we could just get the ruler and measure it in 2 places so that we can make sure they're the same distance, and that will be a nice true position. We can then mark it with a pencil. Remember to do the inside as well, because we're going to do the same again. We're going to make some little indents in the middle of that gap so that we know our screws or our nails are going to come nicely into the middle of the piece of wood that we want to join. So again, drill through. I seem to be getting away with drilling here nicely on the bench with me holding it and using one-handed. If you're feeling a bit cack-handed or you just don't know what to do, then clamp it. Don't have things flying around the workshop, around the garage. That's not going to help anybody. So putting the base on, again, a little bit of glue might be helpful. So just a thin line perhaps down the faces. And then the issue is, right, so how do we hold this? How do we stop it wobbling? Well, if you can do something as simple as this, put it on the bench, turning it over to lay on a nice flat bench, then you're good to go. However, things never work out that simple. So if you've got a clamp, use it. They're brilliant. That's what they're for. That's what they love to do in life. So clamp up the side, and inevitably, as soon as you do that, things will shift and move around. But you know, just a little bit of wiggling, jiggling, and you're good to go then. Then you can put the screws in with absolute confidence that A, they're in the right place, and B, they're not going to shift whilst you're doing so. So that's looking good to me. Do the other sides. When you drive the screws down, see if you can get the head to go just a little bit below the surface so that there's nothing sticking up that either you or the bird can hurt themselves on. So I think what we'll do on this side is I will show us using nails just to support and encourage those who might not have screws but are limited to using nails. We've got the same marking out to do because the same issue, remember, is there. What we want is the nail to come out into the middle of that piece of wood. So we're going to make some drill holes in between those 2 pencil lines, and it's important then to make sure that you use a nice thin drill. Now by that I mean, if you're using say a 1mm nail, don't be using 5 or 6 or 10mm, use a 1mm or less. But anyway, drill the holes so that you can be confident that when you nail through, they're going to come through into the middle exactly where you want them. We don't want these things splitting out the side. If you've got your glue and you are using that, just a thin layer again, we don't need to go over the top. Make sure they're flush, so the back is in line with the back, the bottom is in line with the bottom, and then take your nails, and this is the beauty of putting it in the hole. Now if you drill them the hole too large, what you're going to end up with is nails just flopping around in the wind. So we want a nice tight grip between the nail and the hole. Now the trick is changing the angle of your hand to make sure that you're striking the top of the nail. Now what do I mean by that? Well, if you go striking the head, what will happen is you end up with a wonky donkey. And it happens to the best of us, but when it does, and it will happen, right, it happens just here, you can tap the side and then carry on, all right, straighten things up. So then we're going to fit the front. Well, hopefully what we've got is a nice tight fit, yes, and that's going to fit in there nicely. So we, before you go putting it in, of course, don't forget the glue. For those smart ones amongst you, you will have spotted the fact that wouldn't it have been really nice had we drilled some pre-holes to come in the side in order to make the fixing secure, but we didn't. By now, hopefully, you're getting the hang of banging nails in, or you've got the hang of banging, putting the screws in. So either way, just do your thing. Just try not to drop the nails in any way other than in the midst of the wood. And with the magic of cinematography, it's all done and complete. Leaving, of course, just to put the lid on. Now, why do we need a hinged lid? Because occasionally, once a year perhaps, you need to be able to get the stuff out, the old straw, the old nesting material. So a hinge is helpful from that regard because it allows you to lift the lid, scoop out all the yucky bits, and clean and clear the nest. But of course, we said before, you may not necessarily have a hinge of any description. So what are we going to do if we haven't got that? Well, like I hinted at the beginning, if you happen to have an interest in ice cream, and who doesn't? My favourite is Hokey Pokey. I'm going to use this old box to cut a rectangular strip of plastic. Now, in this thin material, a pair of scissors will probably work really easy. Just snip through the sides. If that's not going to work for you, then use a knife. If you're using a modelling knife, cut away from you. Keep the hands clear of that sharp edge. What you want is a nice rectangular piece like this. And then what we're going to do is use it as a hinge. So here we go. There's the hinge working quite nicely. So we've got to now fix this bit of plastic to the wood securely. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to use one or two things. Here I'm going to hope and pray that you might have some nails around the workshop. Some small nails with a big head. These tend to be called either a clout head nail or a felt nail. Really good for the job. So you're just going to put a few tiny little nails with big heads on just to secure and hold this plastic, which we're going to use as a hinge. Okay, I haven't got any clout head nails, Steve. Well, have you got a staple gun? If not a fancy one, have you got a stapler that you use for paper that might be encouraged to go through the plastic? Well, if you have, you're in. Sorted. Lovely jubbly. All you do is put a couple of staples in to secure the plastic hinge and the job's done. Let's just look at the handiwork. Oh, lovely, lovely. It remains then just to put a couple of holes in because I don't know what you're going to fix this bird box to, whether it's the garden fence or some kind of a special post that you've got. You might need to put one or two, one in the middle perhaps, or some at the edge. If you're going to fix it to a tree, then try not to use nails or screws into that. It might be sensible to perhaps put a couple of drills in and then take some string, wire or rope going around the tree and try and look after the tree. Essentially, but there we're done. We did it. Beautiful bird box. Hope you've had fun. Hope you stayed indoors, of course, and that you're safe with Mum and Dad. Kia ora.